Tassifal sat in a chair on the porch of a small house made of standard plastic modules and watched the star-studded sky. Such houses could be found on almost any inhabited Earth-type world in the galaxy, but Tassifal didn't care about originality. He was content with having decorated the walls of the house with large hand-drawn flowers and having planted a small flower bed by the porch. Of the 3 moons that usually hung in the sky as an inseparable team, only one was visible now. The other 2, and a fair portion of the diamond-bright stars, were obscured by the huge dark silhouette of a spaceship coming in for a landing. All running lights on the ship were off. The crew adhered to the light discipline, all by the book. But the light reflected from the 2 moons obscured by ship was so intense that its hull was surrounded by a halo of ghostly radiance. Tassifal remembered the halos around the saints on the ancient icons. So much for the light discipline. He stood up and walked over to the flower bed. The large night bloom flowers he had planted right by the wall seemed to have mistaken the ship's arrival for the premature setting of the 2 moons and began to bloom. Tassifal was always amazed at the speed with which they unfurled their long, fleshy petals, almost on the verge of visible motion, just a bit faster than the minute hand of a clock. He touched one of the flowers and the petal visibly shuddered. "Sorry, guys, you woke up too early," Tassifal thought. There were actually still 3 hours left until the first moon set, and the small pesky insects, resembling 8-winged flies, were still sleeping in the coastal thickets. The food will arrive later. The massive shadow in the sky grew larger, but Tassifal knew there was no risk. There was simply no room in the small hollow where his home stood to land such a behemoth. The ship would land in a large field near the stream, half a mile from the house, just like all of those before it. Tassifal entered the house, guided by the light of one of the small moons, the edge of which was already peeking out from behind the ship's hull as it moved slowly across the sky. He had to get ready for visitors. The messenger arrived in the morning, just as Tassifal had expected. He didn't keep much track of time, but there was no doubt that the messenger had arrived exactly at 8 or 7 or 900 ship's time, whichever planet they used as a reference. That was the military's way of doing things, and Tassifal had no doubt that this was a warship even before he saw the messenger. Only the military built such huge ships that could land on planets and orbitals. The messenger's uniform was unfamiliar to Tassifal. The brim of the tactical helmet was raised upward, revealing a young face. The messenger tried his best to look as serious and formal as possible, but the thick scattering of freckles spread across the pale skin on either side of his snub nose negated his efforts. "Mr. Tassifal, Admiral Dacko has the honor of inviting you to an emergency meeting," the soldier reported briskly. His right hand twitched as if he was about to salute, but in the end he refrained, since the man in front of him was clearly a civilian. Evidently, the regulations did not require such a greeting in this case. "Hello, young man," Tassifal said. "Where are you from?" The soldier was clearly confused, though he tried not to show it. "The Federation battleship Indomitable, Space Marines, 1st Reconnaissance Platoon, Specialist 2nd Class Kessiel," he reported cheerfully. Tassifal smiled. I can see you're from a battleship, he said. I meant, where did you come from? Well, along with your indomitable battleship. What do you mean, where are we from? The soldier had eventually lost his composure. The amazement flushed his freckled face. Well, of course, we're from the Second Free Federation. Where else? He looked suspiciously at Tassifal. You don't think we could have anything to do with the Genatrians, do you, sir? They're non-humanoids, after all. Tassifal nodded his head with the most serious look. Of course, of course. The Second Free, what else? You'll have to forgive my old man's forgetfulness. He winked. Of course, it can't be some lousy Genatrians, is it? Well, young man, I've had my breakfast already, so I can go to that General Dacko of yours with a clear conscience. Admiral Dacko, Mr. Tassifal, corrected the messenger. His voice was an amusing mixture of indignation. How could Tassifal mistake the rank of such an important person? And condescension. What could you expect from those civilians? Tassifal slapped his forehead. Oh yes, yes, to the Admiral. He stepped toward the messenger, not even bothering to close the door to the house behind him. So, shall we go? Admiral Dacko looked exactly as an honored battered admiral, commander of a powerful fleet of a mighty interstellar civilization, should look. A perfectly fitting uniform, a stern look from under his rigid eyebrows, a face of a man with an unyielding will. Behind the admiral's back crowded a silent entourage, aides, assistants, and other lower-ranking officers. The guards were posted at a distance, so as not to embarrass the high command with their presence. Good to see you, Mr. Tassifal. Dacko extended his hand for a confident shot and moderately firm handshake. Or do you prefer to be addressed according to your academic regalia? Not at all, Admiral. Tassifal smiled. I think we should skip that here in a military camp. Just call me Tassifal. That will be more than enough. You know, I've gotten a bit out of the habit of socializing here, so I don't pay attention to such little things anymore. The Admiral only twitched an eyebrow in response. As you wish. He gestured for Tassifal to take a seat at the fold-out camping table, above which was a detailed holo projection of the local quadrant of the galaxy. It is not my custom to waste time with the idle chatter, so I suggest we get right down to business. Tassifal knew that the Admiral wasn't expecting him to make any comments. That is, idle chatter. So he just nodded. Over the past few years, the Federation has greatly expanded its sphere of influence in its arm of the galaxy, the Admiral began. However, we are encountering increasing resistance from Genatrian allies and satellites. The Genatrians themselves are silent, but it is clear that all these microstates, 2 or 3 star systems, no more, are acting on their orders. Of course, he grinned, this pathetic insurgent pose no particular danger to our forces. Sooner or later, however, we will have to face those behind them. Forgive me if my question seems a little naive, Tassifal said. But if a big clash is inevitable with this kind of expansion, would it make sense for the Federation to expand in, shall we say, a slightly different direction? He smiled guiltily. I'm not really up on the big galactic politics, so... The squint of the Admiral's eyes became a little more rigid. The high-strength alloys of space armor added to the already existing steel. I'm not authorized to discuss the decisions of the HQ with anyone, he said, but then softened a little. Ah, what the hell. There is no big secret here, anyway. The matter is straightforward. It's either us or them. Neighboring such a powerful interstellar entity as the Genatrian Commonwealth is an existential threat to the Federation. Therefore, we must take action for the sake of our survival. I think you understand what I mean. Tassifal made an uncertain gesture with his hand, which he hoped could be taken as a gesture of agreement and approval. Very well, the Admiral sighed with visible relief. Then let's go to the main point. In our current situation, the Federation needs to mobilize all possible resources. That is why we have come to Styx. Tassifal smiled uncertainly. Are you calling me up for active duty? Indeed, I was once registered as a reservist, and I even hold the rank of captain in the auxiliary reserve. But I'm afraid I will be of little use in real combat. The Admiral laughed. His laughter was like his uniform, confident and clear. The laugh of a true commander, ready to lead his loyal men into the battle. No, of course not. Since the patriotic draft was introduced 2 years ago, we have no shortage of human resources. Like that of the Styx facility, your value lies entirely in something else. Information. And perhaps some other capabilities. But we need your expert opinion, of course. Tassifal looked to the right, where the mighty dark stream stretched into the misty haze of the horizon. To the left, the ship's bulk blocked the view. Tassifal never lost contact with the stream, even if it wasn't in direct visibility. But by a fortunate coincidence, the Admiral had landed his ship right on the shore. The smooth current had a hypnotic effect on anyone who gazed at it for too long. Tassifal noticed that already at least one of the sentries posted at the gangway to the ship was staring at the smooth surface, swaying rhythmically to the beat of the occasional waves running along the stream. Tassifal perceived these waves directly in his mind as peaks in a regular stream of memories. I'm sorry, Admiral, but I'm afraid my expert opinion will disappoint you, Tassifal said. I can assure you that it's not possible to use the Styx for military purposes. Naturally, the Admiral didn't believe it, but he was tactful or sensible enough not to accuse the scientist of betrayal. Tassifal didn't worry much about that, though. Sooner or later, it always ended that way. As far as I understand from the explanation of the expert committee of the Academy of Sciences, naturally, we did our homework before coming here. The Styx object penetrates the entire galaxy, and possibly the entire universe, the Admiral said. I must admit, I don't quite understand how that's possible, but after seeing the object from the outside, I'm inclined to agree. The expert committee members believe that we can use it as a transportation highway because, within its boundaries, the usual properties of space-time are distorted. I don't fully understand that either, from a scientific point of view. But as for military use, if we can move our forces much faster than the enemy, it will give us a decisive strategic advantage. Tassifal sighed. Why does it always come down to the same thing? Unfortunately, it's not quite how it works, he said. Or rather, it's not true at all. Yes, the properties of the space-time continuum in the immediate vicinity of the Styx are indeed distorted. But that doesn't mean you can wander back and forth along the river at will. You see, these distortions only affect the river itself. It doesn't affect external objects. So your indomitable ship will fly along the object to the rear of the Genatrian Commonwealth for the same amount of time as it would normally. Maybe even longer. Apparently, this possibility was also present in the committee's report, because the admiral took the blow calmly. His disappointment showed only in a slight smile and frowning eyebrows. Well, you are undoubtedly the best person to understand the peculiarities of the object. After all, you've spent how long here now? At least 20 years. More like 20,000. But that's irrelevant, Tassifal said with a slight smile. I understand you had other uses for the object in mind. The admiral gave him a strange look, half apprising, half incredulous, as if deciding whether the old scientist had gone mad from his long solitude or whether it was just his strange humor. Tassifal wasn't sure if the sense of humor didn't also pass in the admiral's world under the category of insanity. Finally, the admiral apparently decided to simply disregard Tassifal's remark. Well, since the object is useless as a transportation highway, we are left with its basic functions. Use it, so to speak, for its intended purpose. Which is... The admiral was clearly getting angry. Obviously, he expected from the galaxy's best expert on Precursors artifacts in general, and the Styx object in particular, a much better understanding of the situation and willingness to cooperate. Look, this is a grave and important matter, Admiral Daka said without any of his former affability. We don't have time to beat around the bush. For the sake of the Federation's defense, you are obliged to assist us in extracting data from the object. Here we go. Finally, in clear and straight words. Tassifal had no doubt that this was the Admiral's primary goal, and the talk of possibly using the object as a transportation artery was only necessary to probe Tassifal's competence and honesty. All as usual. Tassifal nodded with the most serious look. Of course, I'll make every effort. The Admiral's face showed noticeable relief. But your visit was a bit unexpected. I need to think things over and put some system, at least in general terms, to the results of my research. We did not dare to warn you, the Admiral said. Hypergrams can be intercepted. We didn't want to risk the Genatrians becoming aware of our plans. But I understand. Academic research and military development have a different structure after all. The situation is such that we can't afford any prolonged delays. Would 24 hours be all right with you? Yes. One day is more than enough time for this situation of yours to be resolved, one way or another. What do you mean? The Admiral squinted. The entourage behind them stirred. Apparently, they were not used to anyone, and the civilian at that, bickering with the steely commander. Oh, never mind, Admiral, Tassifal said. It's just a clumsy thought out loud. When you live alone on the shores of this... Well, it's easy to pick up all sorts of unusual habits. Tell me, do you have any idea what this place really is? He nodded toward the smooth, dark stream. The Admiral relaxed a little and leaned in. Clearly, he took pride in being involved in every detail of his affairs. Within the limits of his competence, of course, which he undoubtedly held in high regard. It is my understanding that the Styx object represents the largest scale artifact of the Precursors. The river, Admiral nodded at the stream behind him, flows along an artificial ribbon of unidentified material, presumably extending to the topological boundaries of our universe. The water in the river somehow stores information about all the events that have ever occurred in the universe. Though I have absolutely no idea how one could encode even a couple of jokes in a bucket of plain water. He winked at Tessifal. That's why we turned to you. The expert assured the command that if anyone knows how to get that information from there, it's you. Water memory, Tessifal said thoughtfully. Well, you could say that. The metaphor is vivid enough, though. You see, it's not really a water. Or rather, it's not water at all. What is it then? The Admiral even looked back at the stream, as if double-checking himself. It looks like water. It's pure memory. The memories of every intelligent being that has ever lived in our universe. Don't ask me how they got here. It's far beyond even my comprehension. Okay, if you say so, the Admiral said. He was clearly not one to be easily confused. In any case, it doesn't make that much of a difference. We just need to get the required information from this water or memory. Can you tell me how to do that? We need to develop a proper set of rules. A protocol, if you will. Yeah, the Styx Protocol. That would sound great. Oh no, it's not that easy, Tessifal said. Though the direct assimilation of information is the simplest process. You just have to scoop from the stream and take a few sips. He smiled charmingly. The problem is determining exactly where to draw from. There are no markings on the river, you know. And if you suddenly take a sip of memories incompatible with the human psyche, who knows what could happen? The Admiral looked like he was starting to realize something. But you can give us some clues, can't you? He asked with hope. Well, it can be that there is such an ocean of information, and there is no way to get it. And why do you think no one is pouring barrels of it into their reserves? We're not the only civilization that knows the object exists. Yes, it's a challenge. But I'll see what I can come up with, Tessifal said. I think by tomorrow morning we should be able to reach some certainty on the matter. Right now, I think you two have more pressing matter to attend rather than philosophizing with an old scientist. He pointed behind the Admiral's back toward the sentries along the stream. The Admiral turned around, looking perplexed, but his face immediately took on a resolute, regimented expression. Colonel, what the hell is going on with your men? He shouted at one of his subordinates in a Space Marine uniform. Is this a warship or pleasure yacht, for God's sake? What the hell is going on up there? Two of the sentries, having left their rifles on the bank, had already waded waist deep into the river, and like little children at bath time, were running their palms over the stream's surface, mesmerized at the dark liquid. Three others sat on the bank, gazing dreamily at their companions and swaying gently like hermits immersed in meditation. "Stop immediately!" the colonel shouted, rushing towards his subordinates. "Stand down! 3 days of arrest for each of those idiots! Major, call the officer of the guard and a new watch! What a bloody mess! Can't you keep your men in check?" He yelled something else, but Tessifal didn't listen. He was accompanied home again by the second-class specialist Cassiel, but Tessifal was so deep in thought that the boy didn't dare to speak to him. Yet another military mission. Tessifal was definitely starting to get tired of it. "What do you mean disappeared? That's impossible!" It was obvious that Cassiel was timid in front of the fearsome admiral, but at the same time he felt that the right was on his side. "Sir, I don't know, sir! There was no order to keep an observation on Mr. Tessifal." Admiral Dacko was furious, but still considered it beneath his dignity to take out his anger on the lower ranks. So he simply let the second-class specialist go and turned to the colonel. "Why didn't you post a guard at Tessifal's cabin? Where are we supposed to look for him now? There is nowhere to hide around here. Have the patrols been dispatched already?" "Yes, sir." The colonel nodded. Just like Cassiel, he did not feel any guilt, so he also held himself confidently enough. "The object has been checked for 100 kilometers in both directions, and there is no trace of the scientist. A guard post wasn't set up because everybody thought he had nowhere to go. You remember the scan results. He didn't have a ship. Not even a simple skimmer. We scanned several thousand kilometers along the length of the object on approach before we found this Tessifal. There was nothing except for his hut." The admiral calmed down a little. Indeed, it was impossible to foresee such a thing. Besides, the scientist had agreed to cooperate, although he was being somewhat vague on the matter. Couldn't he just jump from the object into the vacuum? The edge force fields wouldn't allow it. You can't even land a ship here without some fancy tricks, and that's only from above. "Wait a second. Tell me, Colonel," the admiral said thoughtfully, "if he didn't have any ship here, how did he get on the object in the first place?" The colonel froze with his mouth open. "Maybe someone dropped him off here and then flew away." The admiral shook his head. "Something is not right. So far, I don't see any reason to suspect the Genatrians, but I still don't like what's going on." He put on his cap. "All right. All skimmers are to return immediately. Put the ship on condition 1. As soon as the patrols return, we take off. Until we find out what happened to the scientist, it's too risky to stay on the surface. By the way, what about the sentries from last night?" "At the infirmary," the colonel said grimly. 3 are in state of coma. 2 have completely lost their minds. Keep mumbling something in fish language. The doctors can't say anything for sure. I've set up new posts. I ordered them to stay away from the stream, no matter what, and move them further from the shore just in case. Maybe we should take the control samples from the river." "And what are we going to do with them?" the admiral asked snidely. "It's a warship, not a flying lab. The Federation resources are not infinite, and we cannot afford to spend crazy amounts of money on idlers in white coats roaming around the galaxy at our expense. Tension in the Genatrian front is our first priority." "Maybe it's a priority because we're spending wild money on armaments instead of progress," the colonel thought gloomily. But of course, he didn't say it out loud. "Yes, sir!" he shouted instead, and immediately went to fulfill the order. When the engines failed to start and the ship could not take off, neither the colonel nor even the admiral was hardly surprised, and soon it ceased to bother them at all. There was no real need for extra effort. The current was carrying the light prefabricated boat downstream perfectly on its own. But Tessifal still swung the oars from time to time, not so much to speed things up as to keep his composure. He liked this kind of leisurely physical activity. Not a typical physical training, in which movement and exertion are both the process and the goal, but something that has a certain practical meaning, even it is as insignificant as rowing in an adrift boat. It was a pity, of course, that it had come to this. He liked that place. After all, he lived there for almost 2 centuries. But they'd gotten to him. The diffusion of information goes both ways. The stream absorbs the memory of all sentient beings in all the universes it flows through, and simultaneously shapes the reality of all those universes so that the process happens as smoothly and efficiently as possible. In each of the universes, Tessifal found himself embedded in the local reality in one way or another. And each time it ended up the same. Tessifal wondered what his next new home would be like this time. A couple millennia ago, he lived in a house resembling a giant glowing mushroom, and the entrance was not even in the stem, but in the bottom of the cap, as Tessifal himself then looked like a mix of a giant mosquito and a small lizard. Back then, the visitors flew to him on a giant colony of coral polyps-looking thing as a spaceship. Tessifal glanced at another decrepit hulk of a space warship off to starboard, flying like bees to honey, or like flies to... He stopped his imagination from running wild. The Styx Protocol! Well, the brave admiral got a good one. Tessifal should probably memorize that name. Of course, the object was called something else in other universes, but that didn't matter. What matters is that it works. Those Precursor guys were pretty sharp, if they ever existed. They couldn't completely rid the universes of war and aggression carriers. Just like you can never get rid of annoying flies on a hot summer day. But you could put up fly paper tape. Then, at least in the neighborhood, there will be fewer flies. And the fact that one fly was resistant to the glue and even learned to move on the tape is not a big deal. On the contrary, you can use it as a control specimen or additional bite. Especially since the fly doesn't mind. When Tessifal, having just jumped out of the boat and climbed the small cliff, came face to face with a pair of armed soldiers in combat exoskeletons, he was not even surprised. "The commander is waiting for you, Comrade Tessifal," one of the soldiers said, all 4 eyes blinking. The protective membrane that covered his mouth-nose folds gave his voice a murmuring bassiness. "Given the current situation, your consultation is needed as soon as possible. Conflict with Chiatolan Empire is inevitable, and we're counting on you to help us harness the object's capabilities for the good of the homeland." Tessifal sighed and folded his lower pair of hands behind his back in a gesture of respect and agreement. The Styx Protocol had worked again. I wonder what will happen to me when the guys decide to change the fly tape for a new one, Tessifal thought as he followed the soldiers toward the imposing bulk of another interstellar battleship.